take a look at our top story, and that's about the Quad security dialogue between Australia, India, Japan and the United States. In fact, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar commented on India's relations with China. He said that relations with China are not doing very well. He also added that one of the main reasons for this China's violation of border agreements in 2020. Let's listen into what he had to say, and then we'll take it over to our guest who's joining us this evening.
Right now, I have to be honest, our relations with China are not doing very well. The main reason for that was that in 2020, during the COVID, China brought very large forces to the border areas between India and China in violation of agreements that we had with China. And that created, tensions. It led to a clash. There were people who died on both sides. And the consequences of that, because the issue has not been resolved fully, continue. So right now, if you ask me, how are your relations with China? I have to tell you they are not good, they are not normal right now. But obviously as a neighbor we hope for a better relationship, but that can only happen if they respect the line of actual control and if they respect agreements which they have signed in the past.
All right, so the External Affairs Minister, in no uncertain terms, really speaking about the status of relations that India has currently as far as China is concerned, and it is not good. Of course, to discuss that further, I'm now joined by Ambassador Suresh K Goel, who's a former ambassador. Thanks very much, Ambassador, for taking the time out and joining us here on ET. Now, very public statements really coming in from the Indian Foreign Minister on the soured relationship with China. Now, such public expression of displeasure has hardly been a hallmark of Indian diplomacy until recently. So is that a strategic move that you see here to perhaps build global pressure on China?
Well, if you say that public statements of displeasure over the state of relationship, I think it has been a kind of part of our public discourse over several years now. And in that case, we should not really just look at China, really. We should look at Pakistan, where we have made it very clear that till the support to terrorism continues, we cannot enter into even a dialogue, into even a formal dialogue. It is something that much more extreme than any other case. And therefore, I don't think it's a case of being able to really say upfront of where we are and where we stand in terms of the status of relationship. What I would say that in the case of China, while there have been tough statements from India in the past and today, do they actually reflect the actual state of play? And that is where I would really come, because frankly, China, given the kind of power asymmetry that exists, the relationship that we have, and the criticality of the relationship, and I'm not talking just about strategic, but economic, trade and everything, I think it's going to be very, very difficult to say that, all right, buddy, that's it, and we will not talk anymore. And that will not happen. We will continue to be engaged. And therefore, I would say what he's saying is very balanced, it's very determined, but there are very many nuances in what they're saying. If you also look at the statements which are made at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, so I would say these are balanced.
Right. When you speak about statements, Ambassador Goel, let me also go to one of the other statements. One of the other statements that External Affairs Minister stated, and he stated, and I quote, "We're not looking at other countries to sort out what really is an issue between India and China." So while he's very categorically open about the issue that remains between India and China, his remarks also underscored India's stance on managing its bilateral relations independently, especially in these sensitive matters like the border dispute.
Thank you very much once again. And again, I'm going to look at the whole issue not as a minister. The minister has to see so many things. There are political ideas, there are diplomatic ideas, there are so many things, and therefore he has to be far more careful in what he's saying. I'm only a former diplomat, and therefore I would say it is impossible to simply say that no, our relationship is going to be purely bilateral and not plurilateral or not with the other countries. What is Quad? Let's look at Quad. I mean, after all, This was a meeting. The EM is now in Tokyo to take part in the Quad meeting. Quad is actually a response to China in Indo-Pacific. And therefore, to say that we will look at our relationship only in the bilateral context and not in the other context, I think it's a bit of a play on the words, really. Sumita.
Okay. But Ambassador, there are some others who cast doubts on the effectiveness of groupings such as the Quad, suggesting that it is a Western front and India should not get heavily involved. But has a ship sailed, do you think, when it comes to the cooperation between India and China?
Ship sailed. I don't think ship was ever just in the port. It has been sailing for a long time, really. And the relationship, look at the trade between India and China. Look at our dependence on China in terms of the APIs, in terms of solar panels, in terms of power generation, power equipment, etc. So the boat has been always on the high waters. It is basically how do we navigate the choppy waters on the high seas to make sure that the sail of the ship is in accordance with where we want it to be. And that's a very, very difficult task, considering that the navigation sometimes can be in the other hands. I'm just using the same analogy, really, metaphor. Yes, Sumi.
Right. Right, Ambassador. But lastly, Ambassador, let me ask you, do you see such statements that are coming out of the Quad echoing the reality of a protracted China-US confrontation should Trump return to power? And what are India's options then to keep China at bay?
Quad is a political and strategic response from some countries with the interest in Indo-Pacific. I think the Western countries are also basically playing the game of developing military assets in the region. You know what they're doing in Japan. There are reports in the media about Australia and building up their assets. Taiwan, sorry, not Taiwan, but AUKUS was another part of it. So I think essentially India is being looked at by Quad as a country which will not go into military alignments or military responses. And I think that's a very, very strong indication that India will have limitations in what it can do and what it will not want to do. And that is because across the continent, we cannot really depend upon the military responses to guide the relationship between India and China.
Absolutely, and very well said, Ambassador. Like you rightly said at the beginning of the interaction, all the statements that are coming out is all part of the strategy when it comes to these statements which have been rather upfront. And like you said, India is being looked at as a country which will not go into military responses. On that note, thank you very much, Ambassador, for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us on this crucial story.